This is Zane. Hi, Zane. He usually only votes in presidential elections, but he wants to get a little bit more involved. He's a registered Democrat, but his economic views are actually a little bit more conservative. When he stepped into the ballot box last November, he knew the names at the top of the page, but not the ones at the bottom. So he ended up voting all blue. However, the candidate whose views represented Zane's the most was actually a Republican. The reality is that millions of voters, just like Zane, have been casting straight ballots for decades. 78% of voters vote exactly on party lines, and 20% of them don't even know their state representative.
This is where PoliMatch comes in. The first step is both politicians and voters take the same political test, the polygraph. After that, voters are matched with politicians who answered most similarly on the polygraph. And finally, they can head to the polls with the confidence that they are voting for the person that represents them the best.
Let's take a deeper look behind the scenes. Users will start off the process by entering in their address. They'll then take the polygraph, which provides questions that are fine-tuned to their local and national election topics. And using Google's Civic Information API, our algorithm will work to find out who you should be picking in the next election. Here's what we plan on using for our backend model. We use Nginx, Node, and Postgre to provide a smooth web experience. All of these technologies can fit into a Kubernetes cluster, which is an extremely scalable framework. This means that if we have to deploy PoliMatch on a county level, it's no different than deploying to the whole nation, enabling us to reduce our OPEX. Here at PoliMatch, security is the utmost priority. And especially considering the recent fraud scares in our national election, we will work to ensure that PoliMatch cannot be used in any way to sway any election. And that's why we plan on using AWS cloud services. With an experienced web team, PoliMatch will have an extreme level of defense.
Other alternatives fall into three major problems. First, alternatives are time-consuming. In order to be educated about politics, many read the news in order to keep up. This leads to many voters not being informed about their local politics simply because it takes too much time. Next, it's that many political tests that use a quiz format like PoliMatch only work on a partisan level. While these tests are useful for gaining more insight into your views on larger political issues, it is ultimately useless in local elections because you are voting for people, not parties. Lastly, alternatives are simply not specific enough. Many of the alternatives on the market focus only on national politics, which leaves local politics out of the picture. PoliMatch solves and improves in all three of these departments. First, PoliMatch is extremely concise and fast. While the polygraph test cannot replace reading up on the news, it is still able to capture your political preferences accurately. Next, PoliMatch works on a people level, which means that you are matched to your best fit regardless of your pre-existing political notions. We hope that with this approach, we will be able to break down political partisanship. Lastly, our solution specializes in local elections. While we will still provide support for national elections, PoliMatch shines in local elections because the politicians themselves will provide their political views. This makes it extremely easy to specialize into local elections due to the ease of scaling PoliMatch.
PoliMatch plans to serve two target markets using two different revenue streams. First is the software as a service revenue stream, where PoliMatch and Polygraph will be distributed to political and news organizations for them to integrate them into their website. Next, we plan to enter the data brokerage market. A byproduct of PoliMatch is an extremely robust data set of politicians, and we wish to provide data on politicians' responses to think tanks, educational institutions, and other political organizations.
For the software as a service revenue stream, we will use a price discrimination model in order to determine the monthly rate for PoliMatch. This model will be determined after the first test run of PoliMatch in order to determine the costs involved. For the data brokerage revenue stream, we will use a subscription business model, where consumers can subscribe to get access to the database. The subscription price will also be determined after the test run in order to make sure that the costs involved are adequately dealt with. We plan to launch PoliMatch in May and conduct a test run on the gubernatorial and lower house elections in Virginia. We will then use the next year to improve and expand PoliMatch to cover all Senate elections and most local elections. After that, we plan to start monetizing our data and then expanding internationally in the year after.
We hope that you'll take a leap of faith and consider PoliMatch.